What happens when the only way home is the most dangerous place on Earth? How can a single 720-kilometer stretch of asphalt vanish dozens of young women, turning a routine journey into a death sentence? For decades, the Highway 16 corridor in British Columbia, Canada, known tragically as the Highway of Tears, has exploited the very emptiness of the landscape, preying on the most vulnerable. This isn't a story of one single killer, but of a corridor of terror where systemic failure, neglect, and multiple predators turned a necessity, hitchhiking, into a fatal choice. The history of true crime teaches us that isolation is the killer's greatest ally. Where civilization thins out, opportunity sharpens. The crimes along this route don't just exploit the road, they expose a failure of justice, turning a vast Canadian wilderness into a devastating symbol of negligence and loss. Our story begins not with a single date, but with a decades-long pattern that started long before the crimes gained national attention. The official tally of missing and murdered women along this route, specifically Highway 16 running between Prince Rupert and Prince George, stands at 18 cases, documented between 1969 and 2011. The reality, according to local Indigenous communities and activists, is that the true number is far higher, possibly reaching into the 40s or even 50s. This is the difference between a tragedy and an epidemic, a difference measured in the ignored screams of vulnerable people. The first official case recognized on the Highway of Tears is that of Monica Jack. It was 1978. Monica was just 12 years old, a lively, bright girl from the Merritt area, though her case was later incorporated into the Highway 16 investigation due to geographic similarity and the MO. She was last seen riding her bicycle on a rural road outside Merritt. Her remains were not found until 1995, 17 years later, dumped on a remote hillside. Her case set a dark precedent, a young Indigenous girl vanishing near a major thoroughfare, the community knowing she was gone, but the larger society failing to act with urgency. A more direct example on the Highway 16 route itself is that of Colleen MacMillen. In August 1974, 16-year-old Colleen was last seen hitchhiking near Lac La Hache, about 500 kilometers south of Prince George. Her remains were discovered a month later. Her case, along with Monica's, established the chilling early pattern: young women, often hitchhiking due to the complete lack of public transportation in the region, disappearing from the side of the road. The geography of the Highway of Tears is critical to understanding the crime. It is a harsh, beautiful, yet unforgiving landscape of dense forests, mountains, and vast distances. For the many small, isolated Indigenous reserves along this route, there are no buses, no taxis, and often no cars. Hitchhiking, despite the known risks, was not a choice. It was a necessity, a way for students, workers, and family members to move between communities. The killer, or killers, knew this. They preyed on a structural, systemic vulnerability. They used the road as bait and the endless wilderness as the vault. The wave of disappearances escalated in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In 1988, Monica Ignace, 15, vanished near Thornhill. In 1989, Delphine Nichal, 20, disappeared hitchhiking near Telqua. In 1990, Cecilia Nichal, 16, Delphine's sister, vanished near their village of Burns Lake. The Indigenous community, the families, were screaming, pleading with the authorities. These are not isolated incidents. This is a pattern of violence against our daughters and sisters. The police response, however, was initially fragmented and inadequate, often dismissed as the predictable consequence of a high-risk lifestyle, a coded biased term that placed the responsibility and blame directly onto the victims. Many initial reports were met with skepticism, slow reaction times, and poor coordination between the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who patrolled the vast rural areas, and local municipal police forces. The lack of cultural sensitivity and the systemic marginalization of Indigenous women created a climate where crimes against them were not prioritized, allowing the list of missing women to grow longer and the killer to grow bolder. The case of 20-year-old Ramona Wilson in 1994 brought the crisis into stark relief. Ramona, a member of the Carrier First Nation, vanished after hitchhiking from the town of Smithers to meet friends in Hazelton. Her remains were found nearly a year later in a wooded area near the airport. The sheer grief and anger following Ramona's disappearance and death galvanized the community. It was the collective weight of these specific, heartbreaking losses that finally forced the public and the media to acknowledge the existence of the Highway of Tears. For decades, the investigation was plagued by the belief that there were multiple, unconnected killers. The vast distances and the varying methods, some strangled, some shot, some simply vanished, made it difficult to draw a clear MO. Then, in the early 2000s, police launched Project e-pana, an ambitious, massive-scale investigation aimed at re-examining all the Highway of Tears cases, along with 30 others across the province, to determine if they were linked to a single serial predator. This project was a direct acknowledgement of the systemic failure that had preceded it. Project e-pana utilized DNA evidence that had been meticulously collected and stored, even from the decades-old cases. This forensic review eventually led to the only definitive closure in the Highway of Tears official list of 18 cases. In 2012, the RCMP officially announced that a man named Garry Handlen, an American-born convicted sex offender who had lived in the region, was responsible for the murder of Monica Jack in 1978. Handlen was a long-haul truck driver and a known transient predator. He was linked to the crime through DNA evidence found on Monica's clothing, which had been preserved for over 30 years. His identification confirmed a crucial element of the investigation. The perpetrators were often transient individuals, using the highway for their work, moving constantly, and selecting victims who were far from home or on the road. Handlen's eventual conviction in 2019 provided a sliver of justice, but his connection to only one of the 18 cases underscored the painful reality that multiple predators were almost certainly involved. The investigation into the other cases led to the naming of another primary suspect, Bobby Jack Fowler. Fowler, a convicted kidnapper and rapist from the United States, was a career criminal and construction worker who spent significant time in British Columbia. He died of lung cancer in an Oregon prison in 2006. Fowler was linked through DNA to the murder of 21-year-old Colleen Wilson, who was killed in Prince George in 1974. Though her murder was not officially one of the original 18, it was included in Project e-pana because of the geographical and temporal proximity to the highway cases. The DNA match was partial, coming from a blood sample found on her clothing. Furthermore, witnesses placed Fowler working and living in the areas where several of the Highway of Tears women disappeared. The case of 35-year-old Gail Wise, who disappeared in 1973, also became strongly linked to Fowler. Gail was hitchhiking from Clearwater to Kamloops. Her remains were found in the remote Lac des Roches area, a known stopping point for construction crews. Fowler's known movements and his criminal history made him a prime person of interest in multiple unsolved cases along the entire Highway 16 and connecting routes. Police believe Fowler could be responsible for at least 4 of the unsolved Highway of Tears cases, including possibly the murder of Pamela Darlington in 1970, and perhaps even the disappearance of Delphine Nichal in 1989. However, since Fowler is deceased, these links remain largely circumstantial, based on his MO known timeline and partial DNA evidence. The tragic scale of the Highway of Tears has forced a national reckoning in Canada, directly linking the vulnerability of these young women to systemic issues of racism, poverty, and displacement. The lack of public transportation, the pervasive atmosphere of fear, and the initial lack of aggressive police investigation were all symptoms of a greater societal failure to protect Indigenous women. This was not just a criminal case, it was a human rights crisis. The movement sparked by the Highway of Tears led directly to the formation of Canada's National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, a massive governmental undertaking that concluded in 2019 that the violence was a form of genocide. The inquiry's findings laid bare how systemic discrimination created the perfect environment for predators to operate. The road was dangerous, not just because of the killers, but because the system was designed to overlook the victims. The struggle for the families of the Highway of Tears victims is ongoing. The names of the missing are read at annual vigils, They include young girls like 14-year-old Tamara Chipman, last seen hitchhiking in Prince Rupert in 2005, and 15-year-old Ayala Sarik Auger, whose body was found near the highway in 2006. For every closed case like Monica Jack's, there are dozens of families still waiting for answers, still looking at the asphalt, still living the nightmare of not knowing. Today, while the highway itself remains remote, there have been some structural improvements. Increased police patrols, community-led safe rides programs, and the introduction of a limited shuttle bus service, a long overdue measure, have all been implemented. Yet the vastness of the highway remains, and the memory of the terror is etched into the communities along the route. The Highway of Tears case is a profound and chilling example of how geography and infrastructure can intersect with systemic injustice to create a uniquely terrifying criminal phenomenon. It is a story about the road providing the killer with both a victim pool and an escape route, and a testament to the decades-long fight of Indigenous families who refuse to let the world forget the names of the girls and women who vanished into the wilderness, their lives reduced to a number in a cold case file along a single desolate stretch of asphalt. The highway remains, a perpetual question mark across the map, waiting for the full truth to finally emerge.